Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of the show, and every week I get such a great privilege and such a thrill out of talking to interesting CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of wide-ranging different companies, from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tray, so many others. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And this week we've got a great agency owner and founder. His name is Nick Leighton. He's a serial entrepreneur. 25 plus years experience working across the globe in North America, South America, Europe, the Middle East. We're going to talk about some of those different places that he's worked and some crazy experiences like getting hijacked and held hostage for a period of time. He also owns and operates a coaching and peer advisory board agency, an international marketing agency, and a project management company. He's the author of the book, Exactly Where You Want to Be, A Business Owner's Guide to Passion, Profit, Happiness. And he also does, of course, professional speaking, executive coaching for business owners, and facilitates various different peer advisory boards. And fun fact, Nick met his wife at an event at the Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles. Like, I got to ask about that, right? So this episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you're listening to this and have ever thought about starting a podcast, go to our website right now, rise25media.com. We've got all kinds of resources on there for you to check out to learn more about it. All right, Nick, a pleasure to have you here today. And let's start with this crazy story about you're doing work in the Middle East. You're on a pro bono trip. So your agency is built to a size where fortunately you can do some pro bono work, working with the UN, and you've got a group of journalists you're taking to see these various different programs. And crazy, you get hijacked. Take me back to what's going through your head. You're on helicopters at this moment and men come out with machine guns. What was it like?
Hey, John. Yeah, great to be here. So it's that moment where all it's happening to you, you know it's pivotal to you for a reason. So we are sitting on a very large old Russian helicopter. It has United Nations on the side of it. We are flying. We can see out the window. It's noisy. This is not exactly a luxury helicopter. There is food in the middle of this helicopter, which we've got our feet on. We're cramped in there. It's me. In fact, we have two helicopters and we are flying together. With us, I have a photographer who works with us, and I have about 20 international journalists from around the world. And I'm looking out the window, and we're flying over the Kashmir region, which is between India and Pakistan. And I realized we're just really not in the right place because I know what our flight plan should be. So I'm like, kind of weird. So I unbuckle. I go to the front. It's really noisy. And I shout over to this big Russian pilot, because let's face it, who'd be crazy enough to be flying helicopters in Pakistan anyway, for the United Nations not being paid. And I'm like, what are we doing here? We shouldn't be here. And he points out the window. He goes, you see those two F-16s? They're telling us where to go. I'm like, wow. Okay, cool. And, you've all seen the picture of a little, fighter plane. That's kind of cool. An F-16 up close flying next to you is really scary.
Wow.
So they tell us where to land. So we land in what was a high school kind of yard, if you like. And the whole pitch is, the whole kind of fence is surrounded by guys with machine guns. They tell us to get onto a truck. Not very good communications at this stage.
And do you know at this point who's taking you?
No idea. Nothing is marked. There's nothing going on. So I'm playing it pretty cool. I'm like, okay, I don't want to tell a bunch of journalists that we may be in the middle of something a little bit risky. Don't want them to freak out. So I have a quiet word with the photographer, the UN guy, who's like our guide. He's looking at me like, we'll just go with it. It shouldn't be too bad. Get on the back of a truck, get driven through what looks like a war region.
You haven't told the journalists at this point what's going on?
No, there's no point getting everyone like riled up. I'm like, let's just see where we get to at this stage. And 10, 15 minutes later, we're in this camp. And it's a beautiful, organized camp. There's also tents, and there's a lot of people who have been displaced from an earthquake a few months beforehand. And so this was the military police of Pakistan who had decided to put out aid, but they wanted the journalists that were in Pakistan that we'd taken there to report on this rather than necessarily just report on all the good work the United Nations are doing, because they're an international organization. They wanted the local country to get a little bit of praise for what they're doing for their people, which I understand. Pakistan maybe doesn't have the best media relations around the world. So we were offered tea and cookies, and journalists were politely asked to ask some questions, and they did that. And then we were shown back onto the truck, which took us back to the helicopter. No people with machine guns, and we were allowed to go on our way. And it was,
I guess when the guys showed up with the machine guns, the journalists didn't feel threatened. They didn't feel like they were being held hostage.
No, I think we had like guns being pointed at us.
Right.
They just had guns, we're like, I don't think we're going to,
we'll follow where they tell us to go.
Yeah, right. And where else are we going to go? We're in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, it's like, so not many options. So, and it was that moment where I realized that I really was exactly where I wanted to be. I was doing what I loved with people I loved for a cause I loved. And although we were in danger, we didn't know what was going to happen at that moment, a realization of I'd rather be here than behind a desk right now. And that's
even in spite of being hijacked, you're like, I'm being hijacked, but at least I'm not, at least I'm not stuck in a cubicle.
Right, exactly. Can you imagine anything worse? I mean, if everyone remembers Dilbert, I mean, like, no, that's not what I want to be doing. I'm working with journalists I respect for a large international organization, and I'm privileged enough to be doing this and making a difference. Campaigns that will bring in millions of dollars worth of aid for people who really need it. This has got to be better than something else, punching a clock.
Yeah. So I'm curious then, at what point did those journalists realize that they'd been temporarily held hostage, or are they going to listen to this podcast interview and like, wait a second, when we landed in that random field, that wasn't part of the plan?
Yeah, I told them afterwards, once we got back into Islamabad at the end of that day, what had gone on. An unscheduled stop, I think is kind of the same. That's really all they need to know. Again, we got to be careful what you tell journalists, right? You don't want them to write about things. You can never lie to a journalist, but you don't necessarily want them to write about things. So you don't have to tell them everything all the time. I'm sure that would have turned into a nice story, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have to say, you have to be the cool. I've had some bad tour guides over the year, but you must be the coolest under the collar to get taken, hijacked with a bunch of journalists, and to keep your cool and senses enough to play it off. It's pretty amazing.
Well, don't we get desensitized to these things? I mean, we were in Pakistan in that case, but it was only 6 weeks earlier. We were in Colombia. We were in somewhere else with bad situation, things going on. So this wasn't the first time that things have happened. And
what was that situation? What was that bad situation?
Well, that was more emotive, because the work we did for the United Nations was very much about feeding children. So, if you take some journalists to a municipality refuge in a third world country and you see starving children, and you experience it and you smell it and you step in it and you're like, oh, this is really how these people live. That's just another emotional roller coaster, maybe not being in danger at that time. So a lot of the press tours we would do at that time was showing how badly certain communities needed aid work. That was our job. And if anything, probably journalists are the one type of people who if you're sitting nicely in Amsterdam writing for a nice, comfortable, well-known, respected newspaper, and you take the opportunity to be flown into the Middle East and then on to Pakistan, you probably got a little bit of adventure in you, right?
Probably so. Yeah. Right. You're like, this might not go so smoothly. Right.
Yeah,
right.
There you go.
So I'm curious though, what was it like for you? Your company was doing well enough that you're able to get involved in these types of activities. And I love that you did it. I love companies that do that have more of a purpose to them and that are able to give back. So how did that evolve? And talk a little about what role that played for you and your company being able to, embark in these types of initiatives.
Right. When I work with agency owners, marketing agencies, or business owners, entrepreneurs right now, I also try and identify a champagne moment. Champagne moment is the one thing you want to do personally in the next year or two. So it's all fine having a business, But getting to the first million or the next million is really just a stepping stone. I don't know how personally satisfying that is because there's always another million to get to. So I try and get to the root of why people are themselves, what's important to them. And we have to look at their relationships and the people around them and what's important as far as hobbies and humanitarian interests and what they want to get out of society. Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, if you can do that, if you have a vision for where you want to go, and then you can actually qualify that by having a champagne moment, then that means something. So,
and by champagne moment, you mean like a celebratory moment where you've achieved something.
Right. So it could be buying your first home if you're, a startup, or it could be building a second home in, the town you grew up in or holidayed in as a kid. But it could just likely be, I want to go to the Kentucky Derby, or I want to go and live and work in Italy for 3 months. It could be many things.
Yeah.
So that is an exercise that I did with myself every year. And when I was running the agency in the Middle East, I did that.
And what were some of those champagne moments for you?
So, typical ones that I've had that other people have, writing a book. That's a great champagne moment. That's a lot of things that got to happen for that to happen. My white champagne moment last year was, let's just get our kid into a good college without him getting anyone pregnant, without him getting arrested. That was it. It's like, but it's personal to you, right? So you can make it whatever you want to do. But once you have that vision around that, you can really start planning things because things don't happen by accident. So I realized that I had a humanitarian interest because at the time I was living in Dubai, which is a very hollow, shallow, non-community place to be living. It certainly was back then anyway.
And you live in Los Angeles now, so you would know nothing.
Yes, exactly. It's completely
I'm from LA, so I can make that joke.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Even worse, I live a little bit further south, so now I'm never more than 3 minutes away from a Target. So see where we were. So when I was living in the Middle East, I realized that was lacking, that sense of community and the humanitarian interest, which people have, just wasn't being given to me in the surroundings I had. So I had to go and create it. And at that time, there were a number of large charities moving into the region and using Dubai as a hub. So it was as simple as finding someone in the United Nations World Food Program, contacting them and saying, look, what can we do to help you? And it started with really simple things like, we're going to do an awareness campaign with schools, with kids drawing pictures. Can you bring awareness to that? Or, we're going to do a charity run, a 5K run, something like that. So it started with little things like that, but then it kind of grew to actually giving them exposure at a global level. So that's how it happened.
Yeah. Now, and I know you coach a lot of business owners now, and I've talked to a lot of business owners who talk about the importance of having some purpose behind their business, how that helps with team morale and with recruiting and you really motivating the company, having a larger purpose. So talk a little bit about how that has it impacted your agency, having this larger purpose that you were working on.
100%. And I love that you brought that up because it takes someone who's obviously been around the people you've been around to recognize that working for the United Nations was the single best recruitment strategy that we had. There were other agencies who were doing what we were doing, bigger, smaller. They were there, they existed. And sure, we all had funky offices and beanbags and reception and great stuff like that. But someone would come and would be interviewed and we'd say, well, we're a PR agency. We specialize in technology clients. And we have one pro bono client we do work for the United Nations. And people would say, yes, I want to come and work here. And how soon till I can work with that pro bono client? Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah. We've kind of done something similar. We had a veteran entrepreneur scholarship for a bunch of years when we were doing events where we would cover the cost for a veteran entrepreneur to come to one of our events and be able to meet some of the highly successful business owners that were at these events. We also have our Shining Light project, same thing, where we bring, focus on a worthy organization. And it's great. It's a wonderful way to be able to give back and also get the team members to, be able to contribute as well. Talk to me about how you ended up in Dubai in the first place. I know that, you were recruited and ended up there running a marketing agency and then decided to start your own marketing agency. And I love this. You had 5 friends who were marketing directors for tech companies. You turn to them and those are your first 5 clients.
Yeah.
So, and what a crazy time to do it too. This is around the turn of the century, 1999,
Yeah.
2000 time
Right.
period when Dubai was just booming like crazy. So take us back to what that period of time was like being in Dubai and starting a company.
Oh yeah, I mean, the pictures I could share with you. At one stage, I was working for a technology company and I was doing their marketing. That seemed to be as technology companies were really booming. And that technology company, which is American based, couldn't find the people. They just couldn't because all the technology companies were going. Everyone was very competitive about how do they get good people. So they took me on, they took me young, they trained me, they gave me huge responsibilities over large countries. And they moved me around a number of different countries. Eventually, I ended up in Dubai. And at the time, Dubai was very, very, very quiet. All the large developments that you know of right now just do not.
They weren't there when you got there?
Right. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
So,
Dubai, quiet is not a word that I think of when I think of, what year did you land there then?
So 97 is probably when I moved there full time, and I've been traveling in and out for 2 years before then.
Wow. Okay.
So, back then I would say to people, I'm moving to Dubai. They say, where's Dubai? I said, it's in the United Arab Emirates. They say, well, where's that? I'm like, it's in the Middle East. They're like, well, can you point to that in the map? I'm like, well, it's between Africa and India. I mean, like really,
wow.
No one had heard of the Worlds or Dubai Internet City or the Palm, all these crazy things that exist now.
Wow.
So I got there very early.
And so you went from Paris to Prague to Dubai. Did you feel like you're going like from, the big game to something smaller and smaller?
Dubai's always been a hub. Definitely, if you think marketing and environment and everything, it's very different. I mean, if you go on the metros in Prague, the full frontal nudity is normal. Then you go to a Muslim society where you can't show your upper arms. That's a very different environment to be in.
Yeah.
But, if you can go to different places, then that's awesome. You can absorb all that. Very cool. So it was very quiet, but it was still a hub. And you could see that there was this frenetic energy about to happen. But what I did realize very quickly working for a tech company was I could not find agencies and I couldn't hire people. No one who could understand technology and do it at a Western standard and still know the Middle East region. So I'm like, well, it's those three factors. If I start the agency, will anyone use me? And as you said, I went to 5 of my friends who were marketing directors of other companies, large blue chip listed companies, and said, if I start it, will you use me? And they said yes. So I was very fortunate to be in a situation where I could start with great clients because there was nowhere else for them to go. I obviously had to prove that I could do the results for them, which we could do. And then within about a year, Dubai launched their Dubai Internet City initiative, which then attracted more technology clients and internet clients to the region and to Dubai. And we were very fortunate to be the agency in the right place at the right time. But back then it was all relationships, everything, and I know you talk about that a lot. It was, we knew every single press person in the region. We would go and have a drink with them or whatever. And that was really important. And then we knew the clients very well as well. So it was all about building those relationships.
Yeah. Now, and I know you ended up from there. Well, first of all, let me ask you about you sell the company and at the last minute, you end up selling everything except for the name and holding on to the name. So tell us that story. And then after that, I want to hear this Playboy Mansion story.
Right. Okay. So I was going through the process of moving to the US. And if you ever meet someone who's moving from one country to another, the question is, are you moving because you're running away from someone or you're running to someone? In this case, I was running to someone. I was moving to the US because I wanted to be with the person I wanted to marry. So I went through the process of building my agency, putting in a managing director, and then ultimately selling the agency. And I was selling it to another agency, an agency that had multiple offices, wanted to move into the region. So it
sounds like it was a very deliberate multi-year process, putting the person in, preparing it for sale.
Yeah. Very much so. It was, I have a reason for leaving. Therefore, I need a plan to make that happen. It's not going to happen in 3 or 6 months. I knew we're doing that. Right. And that's one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs, business owners, and particularly people who own agencies, is how do we extract ourselves so we can sell something? So too often companies are around that owner, and we need a way of doing that. It amazes me how often you see an agency where the agency name is the person's name, the founder's name. And that amazes me. It's like, ultimately, if you ever want to get out of this, then you know we're doing that. So I was going through that process. I was selling to a company, an agency that came from the UK. They wanted to be in the region. They saw the opportunity. That was great. At that time, there were a lot of limiting factors. You couldn't just move into the country and start doing what we were doing, mainly because you couldn't get an office space. You couldn't get people. You probably could find the clients, but you couldn't get those two elements. So it made sense for this agency to come. They were buying our client base, our employees, and our office space. And we're getting close to the end of the deal. And they said to me very clearly that they were doing this to expand their brand. I'm like, expanding the brand. So that means you don't want to buy the brand that we developed. And they said, no, we're not really interested in that. And I'm like, that's cool. Then I'll continue the sale. That's totally great. But I'm going to take my brand, my company name off the table. And they're like, that's cool.
That's interesting that they were okay with that because, many cases with a company acquiring another company, they don't want to lose that because then you can. Well, I guess you could keep the name of the company and still have a non-compete, perhaps. Right. I guess you could do that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. There was a non-compete, and I wasn't allowed to do any work in the region for a set period, and so that was fine. As far as that, I was moving to the other side of the world.
So you're okay with that?
Yeah, it's all pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And I said to them, you know what? I've got this brand. A couple people use me in the US. I'm going to take it over there. They were cool. So what eventually ended up happening is that they had to contract as the economy didn't expand as quickly as they wanted it to. So they actually moved out of the region. So while I wasn't in the region, I still had people coming towards me and doing all kinds of requests for work. And up to that point, I'd always push them on to, can't do that, sorry. Then I realized that the people who bought me weren't there anymore. And, it really took no time to turn a website back on and to start accepting the calls. And so essentially we owned the agency again, and clients came back to us because we had those relationships. And
but at that point, you're living in Los Angeles and managing it from afar. So talk a little bit about those challenges, because that could be really challenging as well. Did you find someone good to manage it at that point?
So interesting how that's kind of peaked and flowed, because I'd made a deal with my wife, who's based here, and at that time she was pregnant, that I would not go back to the Middle East. I mean, literally would not go and visit. Ever not go in there.
She was afraid to go. Why? Because of security, or?
Yeah, look, you do EO. I was in EO in Dubai. There are a lot of stories of a lot of entrepreneurs, and stuff happens. So
got it.
Yeah, and so she was like, this is probably not something. I mean, when you're single, do what you want, but family, kids, that's not for our family. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So I started working at remote, having people. I could hire some people. That was not so hard. And I was always kind of not hiding the fact, but just never very open that I wasn't there.
They weren't there.
Just like traveling.
And what year was this that you launched it back up again?
About 5 years ago. Yeah.
It's interesting because the world had changed by this point. It's a lot easier to do work where you can be located in a different part of the globe. Would you say? Definitely
easier. I mean, when I first went through having a managing director over there before I'd sold, even the communication was hard. I mean, 10 years ago, you could barely get on Skype with some regions. But the perception was still that if I was running an agency, I should be there. Now, of course, that's out of the window since COVID. I mean, completely out of the window. I don't think I have spoken to someone since COVID pretty much took hold of everywhere who hasn't said to me, I think I might move to Argentina next week because I can carry on doing my work from there. I mean, So it's a different place now. It's not an issue. If anything, I like to travel around and meet the clients. So I'd rather, because we do a lot of technology clients, I'd rather be close to technology hubs than actually where the media is. The only challenge is this time difference. So if I have a full-time team on the time zone, that's great. It just means there are less hours that I can actually physically speak to people in that region. Yeah.
That can be challenging as well. So tell me the story. How do you end up at the Playboy Mansion, and your wife? How does she end up there, and how do you end up meeting her? That sounds a little nutty.
Good question. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not American, you can tell by the accent. So I'm like, well, as an English person, how do you find an American wife? Now, just like with business, like if you feel like you're ready to settle down, do you just leave it to chance, or do you kind of have a game plan? Gotta have a game plan. Now, this is before internet dating was big.
Is this that? Did you want to move to the US and that's why you wanted a wife who was American?
I'd previously I'd studied in the US. I'd had a business in the US. I felt very comfortable in Los Angeles. So if there was any place I was going to move to eventually, Los Angeles was probably going to be it.
Got it.
Most people don't stay in the Middle East for life. So they move on eventually. So it's a conversation every week. Oh, are you going to go back to the country you came from? Are you going to go to somewhere else, live an expat life forever? So, it was always around.
Yeah.
Like, well, if I'm going to go anywhere, LA's probably going to be the place. So, rather than just going down to your local bar every weekend and seeing if you get lucky, it's like, what else can I do? Where can I go? Now, and you're a member of EO. At the time, I was a member of EO in Dubai, and they had a university in Los Angeles. I wasn't going to somewhere new because I lived in Los Angeles before. I'm like, I'm in for that. That sounds fun. So it was actually an EO university. One of the events was at the Playboy Mansion. So EO had taken over Playboy Mansion. So I was going to that, which was fun. And there's a very long version of the story, but I'll make it short and sweet. My wife at the time was working for an EO member. He was part of the setting up of that event. And he didn't invite her to go to the event, but asked some other people in the office who were male. And she found out about it. She's like, why didn't you invite me? And he's like, well, because you're a woman, didn't think you'd be into it. And she's like, no, I'm offended that you would not ask me during the setup process to like come and help and stuff. And he's like, well, look, I can't get you into the event because it's an EO only event, but I do know the caterer. So I'll give you their phone number. So my now wife gate crashed the party. She called up the caterer and was crouching in the back of the catering truck as that came into the Playboy Mansion. And that's how she got into the Playboy Mansion. Yeah.
I love it. That's great.
So that's where we met. Yeah.
That's great. That's
just
great.
outside the grotto. Yeah.
What a cool story. Talk to us a little about some of the work that you do now. So you the Alternative Board, also known as TAB. Mm-hmm. You're involved with them and you do coaching for marketing and agencies and things like that. Tell us a little about what you do.
So I coach with owners of marketing agencies. So I've taken the experience of starting, purchasing, running, selling agencies, and now I apply that in a coaching setting. So TAB, as the Alternative Board at a national and international levels, I believe 14 countries now, has over 200 coaches here domestically and certainly more in other countries. And normally this coaching and these peer boards are settled around local groups, but obviously the world's changed. So I prefer to have a more of a specialist approach and just work with agencies. So if you run an agency and you want help with sales, you can just go and find a general sales coach. And that's great because that'll teach you how to do sales. But if you want to work with someone to grow that agency, maybe you're not getting enough revenue in, or you're not getting enough profit from that. Maybe you feel like you're just working too hard, or you can't get the people or processes around you. There aren't very many places to turn to. So a general coach can certainly get you so far, but a coach that only works with marketing agencies does have a slight insight into what you could be doing, what models work, what's the latest thing. So I do that one-on-one with business owners only of agencies. And then I also bring them together, which is a peer board or EO terms as a forum. So a board meeting once a month. So all those owners own agencies. They don't necessarily compete. So you might get an SEO company with a videographer company with a digital marketing agency. So they're all different types of agencies. Put a PR agency in there as well, but they all have the same elements. They're all pitching for work. They all have different models and strategies, which is really going to take their agencies to the next one. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, very cool. All right, Nick. So Exactly Where You Want to Be is the name of the book. Mm-hmm. And where can people go to learn more about you?
Exactlywhereyouwannabe.com will be a good place to start. That's what it's all about.
Great. And get on his email list. You've got a great email list too. You share some good content through that, which I'm on your email list and read your stuff. Cool. So Nick, thanks so much.
John, it's been fantastic. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.